we have sort of created this golden handcuff situation for ourselves where we are, we're in a lot of debt, and we have a lifestyle that we have sort of gotten, comfortable with. And then, so if we're ever faced with some major decision from an employer, we can't really do a whole lot about it because it's going to affect our livelihood, our comfort, and so many things are sort of at stake that then we feel like we're sort of forced into just trying to adapt to whatever is sort of, put on our laps.
There are times in our lives that change the way we see the world. Navigating these challenges can take insight, trusted confidants, or even a coach. Let's explore those moments. In this companion podcast to RX for Success, we will discover ways to learn and write our own success stories together. I'm Dr. Dale Waxman, a physician coach with MD Coaches, and this is Life-Changing Moments. My guest today is Dr. Babak Mokari. Babak is an integrative medicine physician in solo practice in Charlotte, North Carolina. Dr. Mokari trained in osteopathic medicine, completed a family medicine residency, and has added several skills, including acupuncture and wilderness medicine, to the many therapies he offers patients. He has also held leadership positions in the local medical society. His path into medicine story is chronicled in RX for Success podcast number 155, and you can find that on any podcast search engine. In that podcast, Babak discussed the many twists and turns in his professional career, which included exploring or working in optometry, ophthalmology, orthopedics, radiology, and even investment banking. I invited Babak back to discuss the qualities he possesses that enabled him to make these shifts, seemingly with ease. Full disclosure, Dr. Mokari and I have known each other since he was a family medicine resident in the same program where I served as a faculty member. Further, we have maintained a friendship since then, and I've also been a grateful patient of his. So, Babak, welcome to Life-Changing Moments.
Thanks, Dale. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So, first of all, for those who did not tune in to that first podcast, the RX for Success, can you tell us just a little bit about your practice situation, what you do and where you are?
Sure, thanks. I'm actually in the 9th year now of being in private practice. So back in 2014 is when I took the big leap after a couple of years of researching and looking at practice models of integrative medicine practices around the country and interviewing with some of the medical directors and practice managers of these different practices around the country and deciding which direction I wanted to take for the practice. You mentioned from the previous podcast, I talk about this integrative medicine practice that I had joined after residency with Russ Greenfield. And that was an excellent platform and model for me to gain a lot of experience about what I thought worked really well in that particular setting and what were some of its limitations. And so that experience itself, and then interviewing some of these other practices around the country, gave me at least a good starting point. And as I think any entrepreneur would attest, there's things that you have ideas about, and then once the rubber hits the road, you learn a lot of lessons, and sometimes hard lessons and expensive lessons along the way. And so there were some bumps along the way at first, but nothing that I would say were regrets. They were all very important steps in the journey and getting me to where I am today. And thankfully, I can say that the practice is thriving, and I'm able to offer my services to a wide variety of patients in the Charlotte area.
I know that you, in the earlier podcast, you're not really doing primary care, but can you just give us a list of some of the things that you do in practice that you bring to patients?
Sure. So as an osteopathic physician, osteopathic manipulation therapy is probably the largest aspect of the services that I offer in my practice. And with that, most of my patients that I treat present with musculoskeletal conditions. So be it low back pain, I would say that's probably the top diagnosis, including others like neck pain, headaches. It's interesting. We don't always think about when musculoskeletal medicine when it relates to certain things like TMJ and even some atypical chest pain and rib dysfunctions and so there's a lot of overlap between osteopathic manipulation medicine and sports medicine and some of the the ailments that are treated. And then the remainder of my practice is kind of a smattering of a lot of different things that allow me to incorporate my training in acupuncture, in mindfulness medicine, and hypnotherapy. And so, and as you mentioned, I'm family medicine trained, and so really that broad background in family medicine enables me to sort of treat anything that walks in the door, whether it's with an integrative approach or just drawing upon the family medicine training.
Yeah, great. Well, and I know both personally as a patient of yours, just how skillful you are and how much benefit that I've gotten. But also I remember when I was in practice and I sent patients to you, how grateful they were for how effective you were. And especially when a lot of other things that I was trying to do weren't working. So it was I've just a lot of gratitude for both of those arenas. You've been in this situation for about 9 years, and there's this lovely story of your pathway to where you are now. And what I wanted to kind of turn our attention to for this podcast is that you had talked about many different careers that you investigated or invested time in. I've already alluded to some of those in the introduction. What struck me in your story is that in all of those pivots, and even some we haven't even heard yet, because I know there's been some other pivots for you. You are not coming from a place of superficial indecisiveness, I think, sometimes. And I'm really clear on that, both in your story and just also knowing you. But rather, there was a sense that you were willing to keep searching until you landed where you belonged. Does that seem right to you? Does that resonate?
Yes. That I would say that's pretty accurate. I think there's things that I would say I've done very intentionally, and there are things that have happened because of just a general approach and a general attitude about life and the circumstances that we're presented with, and how we can choose to react to them. And so I think it's just been kind of a mixture of both.
So can you say some more about that attitude that you're bringing?
So one of the things that made a big impression on me years ago, it was one day my father comes home with this large framed poster, and it had a quote on it, and it was it said, "Chance favors the prepared mind." And I believe it was a quote by Thomas Jefferson. And I remember seeing that, and it made a lasting impression on me that things can happen in life that are circumstantial, but those who sort of are positioned in a way to be able to recognize opportunities, recognize red flags, and be able to react accordingly and take advantage will do better than those who are not in that position. And so I feel like one of the things that my parents really tried to instill in all of all my brothers and I was this idea that if we have a solid foundation of knowledge, perspective, and just overall sort of attitude, that we would do well no matter sort of what path we choose. And I think has served all of us really well.
Oh, that's great. I love that. I love that quote too. That's I don't know that I was always prepared. I was always prepared, but it leads to some of the themes that I noted. And after I listened to the RX for Success podcast, I said there were three themes that emerged for me that describe you. One is adaptability. Another is serendipity. There's that chance piece. And then the willingness to continue to ask yourself, what else is possible here? What else is possible? So I'm curious, in addition to what you just said about, the foundation from your parents, what do you draw from to be adaptable?
Well, I think there's a couple of different experiences and that have given me that ability to sort of be adaptable. As was mentioned in the previous podcast, there were a lot of different ups and downs in my in my life and career, and being an immigrant from Iran, and so I think realizing that life can take certain twists, and it's ultimately our responsibility or opportunity, however you want to look at it, to react and to a particular situation. And so for me, over time, I have sort of developed this kind of litmus test for whatever sort of life has placed me in. And so, I'll make a decision about a path that I want to pursue. I start to go down that path, and I'm at different sort of times along the way, reassessing the situation, my satisfaction, so to speak. I'm trying to think of a better word, but my happiness, or my, just overall wellness and balance in life, and just a lot of different metrics in terms of, whether it's a work-life balance or satisfaction from what, you're doing day to day versus the work environment and corporate, culture of where you're at, whether it's a corporate sort of environment or a small practice, whatever it may be, just kind of looking at all the different things and how from a day to day to month and year to year sort of things are progressing, and allowing myself the grace, so to speak, to recognize if I'm unhappy, if there's things that, if that's the case in whatever situation that might be, are there things that I can be doing differently to modify the situation that I'm in? And sometimes realizing that there's a limit to that. And there's sometimes, if I'm in a setting does not allow for me to make certain adaptations and changes to the environment to improve it, whether it's for my own personal sort of well-being versus the quality of care that I maybe feel like I want to deliver to my patients, as an example, whatever it may be, even down to sort of, do I feel like I'm appreciated where I am? Do I feel like everyone is appreciated where I am? How is it that if someone presents with an issue or some adverse event, how does the administration or the whoever's in charge handle that? Things like that. And so for me, I would look at situations like that, and I would say over, from my medical career, at least from when I completed residency onward, there were moments where I would look at different things that had happened around me, or felt like there was a direction in which the practice was going, and I would ask myself whether that's something that I can either manipulate in some way to improve, or is it something that I can live with, or is it something that I cannot, and it's something that I need to make a change. And that's, at least from my own personal experience, I've allowed myself to make those kind of points where I can kind of stop, hit the pause button, and say, is this where I want to be? Where do I think this ship is going? Is this ship sinking? Is this ship just deviating? Sometimes there, as with large healthcare systems, that there can be administrative changes that suddenly change the direction of how it impacts your individual practice, and so I think each of us sort of has to make that decision when certain events like that happen, whether there's budget cuts or whatever there might be. Am I okay with this? Is this something I can adapt to? Let me weigh the pros and cons of the situation, and do I want to make any changes? And so for me, I've allowed that to happen at a kind of regular increments.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment. But right now, I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians for physicians to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests, whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics. Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview.
So that's my follow-up question. It sounds like, are you intentional about that self-assessment about how things are going? And, you said regular increments. Do you do like an annual review or every few months kind of thing? How do you do that?
In some ways, I do it probably all the time to some very low level, being in private practice, because everything is my responsibility and I can very quickly pivot and make changes. But at the same time, some of the bigger sort of worries that were present in the first few years of practice are really no longer on priority, and they're very much lower sort of on the list of things that will occupy my thoughts. But when I was in other employed positions, I would say it would usually be an annual sort of process, unless there were things that happened unexpectedly during that time. I think the term that sort of comes to mind is threshold for things, whether you want to call things discomfort or change or whatever that might be. I think we all have different thresholds, sort of, and I can speak to us as physicians. I think we have different thresholds in each of us as individuals, sort of as what we are willing to take on, to adapt, to tolerate, depending on sort of the needs of our employers and of our patients, of the healthcare system, and either locally or nationally. There's so many different sort of factors that influence how we can practice medicine and feel satisfied doing it. So I think all of us have different levels of tolerance for some of these changes that have occurred. So I think for me, maybe in some ways I have a lower tolerance for some of the things that I feel like are changes that are against the grain for me in terms of what I feel like I want to be able to do in a medical practice than maybe some other colleagues.
Now, you said something about the give yourself the grace to notice when you're unhappy. And I love that. And I want to amplify that because so many in our profession really bury their unhappiness. I mean, I know you know this. They really sort of aren't even in touch with that they're unhappy. They're just grinding through. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And and on this show before, we've had guests where we discussed that we are, in our training, we're told to sort of put all that stuff aside and delay gratification. And then, when you get out and practice, you could continue to behave in that way where he's like, oh, well, I'm unhappy. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. So I love that giving yourself that opportunity to recognize, is this fulfilling or am I unhappy? I think that's great.
Thank you. And I think for me, certainly if everybody had a low threshold for discomfort, then there would be, no physicians working in a lot of different settings. And so I'm not saying that that's the way to go for everyone. I think we all just need to honor sort of our own priorities and big picture. One of the articles that I wrote when I was president of Mecklenburg County Medical Society was about sort of our own, say, what reasons we give ourselves for tolerating a lot of the things that we do in medicine. And so whether it's because we have sort of created this golden handcuff situation for ourselves where we are, we're in a lot of debt and we have a lifestyle that we have sort of gotten, comfortable with. And then, so if we're ever faced with some major decision from an employer, we can't really do a whole lot about it because it's going to affect our livelihood, our comfort, and so many things are sort of at stake that then we feel like we're sort of forced into just trying to adapt to whatever is sort of, put on our laps. And, as you know, over the last several decades, it seems like there's always something in medicine that is sort of put forth for us, and it's just expected that we're going to deal with it. Whether it's an adjustment on our income or the metrics in which we are paid, or the hours that we work, or the number of patients that we see, per hour or per day, how we code, so many different, and EMR. There's always so many different things that have constantly, and some of it has been changes for the better, but sometimes there's been changes that, we can all sort of agree that we're not necessarily better for either the patients or for the practitioners that have occurred over time. And so I think it's just some of those things that in some ways kind of hamstring us, and because we are a profession that generally has been sort of dissociative, in the sense that we don't have unions. We don't really, it's hard to have a collective voice. And so we really rely on medical societies, whether they're at the local, state, federal, national levels, to hopefully represent us to government and to policymakers. And it hasn't always worked out in our best interest or our patients' best interest. And I think those are things that, again, I hope that there will be some changes that will occur. I don't know how they can occur per se. There's a lot of moving pieces, but I think obviously our own attitudes towards each other, towards our profession and our communities, and I think can hopefully change in a way that will allow us to be more cohesive and have a much stronger voice, so that we can represent ourselves and our patients better.
So it's interesting, we started with sort of some of the attributes that you have, this sense of adaptability and this sense of, what else is possible, and tolerance, and, notice and giving yourself the grace of, being unhappy. And then, one thing that I didn't remember when I was listening to the podcast was your orientation to really elevating the community, elevating the community of professionals as well. And that some of the things that you bring, some of these attributes that you bring are, you're modeling that for some of your colleagues as well. And then forming a sense of community so that we can all move forward together with what's the right thing to do for our patients and for the community. So I just wanted to honor that in you as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, in some ways, as you can see, me being in private practice and not taking insurance in my practice, is I essentially stepped away from the mainstream, establishment medical practices. But I feel like I don't want to, and I won't abandon sort of my medical community in that way, So I can maybe practice in a setting that honors my perspective and what I want to be able to offer my patients, and practice in a way that's also honors my own sort of priorities for work-life balance and different things, and my approach to healing, and what I think from an integrative standpoint is the way to do that. But I still feel like my involvement with the medical society is one of the ways to try to basically still show that I support my fellow physicians and understand that, not everybody is going to walk the path that I've walked, and we all have different reasons for that, and whether it's our specialties or our own perspectives, whatever it might be. But if we're going to move our community, our country in a better way, then we hopefully will decide to collaborate more and to, and ideally someday we'll be able to achieve that.
Yeah, neat. Well, I want to bring us back to you and some of the qualities of you, and I especially want to go back to something you said about chance favors the prepared mind, and this concept that I picked up on, this concept of serendipity. And I was thinking especially about when I've met you, because you were doing investment banking analysis. And then there's this guy that's showing up for our noon conferences and the family medicine residency. And then all of a sudden we had this opening for a second year resident. You'd already done 1 year as an internship before doing investment banking. And one might look at that and say, wow, what a great chance happening that we had this opening. You were there. You were awesome. We brought you into the program. And so there's some serendipity, and there's several other moments in your life that I picked up on that sounded like that too. But serendipity seems kind of passive, and I don't get that from you. It's not really passive. There's some intentionality there as well. Does that resonate with you also? And if so, what are your thoughts about that?
I think when we think of just a definition of the word serendipity, there's some limitations to that in the sense, at least applying to what we're talking about. All of the different inflection points in my career, there was some initiation, there was some action on my part first. And then whether you want to call it, good fortune, or whether it's some higher power, whatever you want to sort of attach to it, that was sort of what we're calling serendipity. So for me, when I realized that investment banking was not fulfilling for me in that setting, at least, and I wanted to come back to medicine and finish residency, then I made the move to reach out to the program director at the residency program in Charlotte, because I liked living in Charlotte and wanted to stay in the city. And it just then happened that this position came available. And some years later, after residency and working at the integrative medicine practice, then, as you are well remember, there was this sort of hints and sort of things that started to happen where it was obvious that the practice was most likely going to be closed. And so before they ever announced that the practice was going to close, I had already found another opportunity, because months before that, I thought, gosh, there is no way that from the way that they're sort of posturing and things, that they're going to keep this practice open. And so I need to start thinking about what I can do. And it first started with me actually approaching some of because at the time, if you recall, I was doing urgent care as well on the side. And so I remember contacting them and basically saying, if this practice were to close and I want to continue to do osteopathic manipulation, what are my options? Am I going to be able to work within the healthcare system, or am I going to, or can I go into private practice? And at the time, the hospital system said, well, as long as you have a contract with us with urgent care, it's a conflict for you to go to practice outside of the system. And so that's when I realized, gosh, okay, if it's going to be this type of restrictions on what I can and cannot do, and I really know that I want to be able to practice osteopathic manipulation, I think I need to start looking at what my options are. And that's when I started to just kind of look around the country and see what other job opportunities there could be, and just happened to see in a osteopathic medical journal that there was a faculty position available in California. And even though I didn't have any teaching experience, and it said clearly in the ad that they wanted teaching experience, I thought, well, how can I ever get teaching experience if I don't ever actually teach at some point? And so I thought, I'm just going to apply anyway, because who knows, right? And next thing I know, I'm getting a phone call and an interview and a job offer, and then it was an amazing experience to be able to go teach and be a part of an academic setting. So that's what I mean by there's some initiating sort of factor, and then there's some serendipitous or fortunate event sort of that follows.
There's also this quality of not necessarily seeing what is it in written form as potentially a limitation as a limitation. So it's that quality of you so what else is possible? And I'm going to go ahead and explore it anyway. And they can decide whether I don't have enough teaching experience or whatever. So
exactly. And the same thing with the residency. I'd been out of residency at that point a year almost, being in investment banking. And so I had no idea if they had a position open, if they had any interest in taking somebody like me on, but it was worth a try.
Yeah. I love this conversation about some of the qualities and then how you express those, both reactively, but also very intentionally, and how you approach things intentionally. I think some of our listeners who are put also at some of their own inflection points can really take on some of these skills that you have, and as a mentor, if you will, for helping them move through their branch points in their lives as well. So along those lines, just as a way of wrapping us up, I'm guessing that you may be mentoring people you don't even know that you're mentoring, but you may have some formal mentees as well. What advice do you give to people who are either formal or informal mentees, or people who aren't even mentees yet for you that are listening to this podcast, about, how to approach your career? What are, based on your own experience?
Well, I think depending on where someone is in their path and their career, I think there may be a little bit of nuances to the advice, but for the most part, I think the message that I would give most folks is that give yourself credit for what you've achieved at whatever point you are in your path, and by that I mean don't sell yourself short. Honor what you've done. Have that confidence, hopefully, that you've accomplished the things that you've done, and it's not by accident, and you have. And you deserve to get the things that you want to achieve, so that's one part of it. And the other thing is, don't be afraid to fail, and don't be afraid to pivot. Committing to something doesn't mean that you can't change your mind later. An interview is not always the best way to assess whether your employer is or your employment setting is what you thought it was going to be. And so perhaps you start and you realize that this really isn't what they promised me, and that's okay. And maybe there's things you can do to make that environment better. But if for some reason you can't, it's again, if you have the sort of the confidence and feel like you deserve better and you deserve the things that you have worked towards, then honor that and pivot and look at other things.
Yeah, if I had to summarize what you're saying right now is to, and also the rest of this podcast, is really this sense of honoring the self, honoring the path and honoring your, how you're experiencing things professionally, just to really honor the self and be okay with returning to what's important to you. And so I really appreciate your willingness to share that and share it yourself with our listeners. And so, Babak, thank you so much for your willingness to be on Life Changing Moments with me today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Dale.
Here are my takeaways from this conversation. I'd like to restate the 3 themes that reflect how Dr. Mokari approaches his professional life. Number 1, serendipity. While serendipity seems to be passive, what we learned in this conversation is that those who are intentional about what they want in their lives find those elements when they emerge. Dr. Mokari shared an adage he was introduced to at a young age: chance favors the prepared mind. Our paraphrase was that those who recognize both opportunities as well as red flags and respond to each of those accordingly will live closer to their unique path than those who do not. Number 2, adaptability. Reassess from time to time, perhaps annually. Allow yourself the grace to realize that you may be unhappy and make changes accordingly. A word of caution here. Your threshold for discomfort could be very high, so do be honest in these reassessments. Number 3, ask yourself, what else is possible? In honoring your priorities, it may make sense to ask yourself what else you can be doing to be professionally or personally fulfilled. Finally, if after you have self-assessed, have given yourself the grace to realize that you may be unhappy and are looking for what else is possible, coaching can offer a space for you to explore that and provide yourself a pathway back to professional fulfillment. We at MD Coaches have all been there, and we're here to help. For more information, please contact us at mymdcoaches.com. Thank you for listening, and be well. Thank you for tuning in to Life Changing Moments. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to rate us 5 stars and leave a review. Doing so helps our podcast reach more listeners. Have something to share? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Visit the MD Coaches community on Facebook groups. This dynamic virtual space is a place to continue discussion about life-changing moments and perhaps share some life-changing moments of your own. Join the conversation today.